Dr. Mindy. All right. So I have to start with this question because, as a person who loves to read the scientific literature and has more than a few friends in the scientific community, uh, why are there so few studies on women and
Yeah,
women's health?
yeah. This is the $1,000,000 question. I think the first thing to realize is that human studies in general are way more expensive. So I'm just start off with that idea that when we go and do a human study, the cost goes way up.
Hmm.
So when we look at the cost of a study on a human done properly, we also have to look at who funds those studies. And many times the people that fund them are are pharmaceutical companies. So we have to understand that just studies in general on humans are far and few between, although we have some great ones. Second thing, here's the hardest part about helping women is that we need everything to be mapped to our hormonal cycle.
Hmm.
So it's almost near impossible, but it needs to happen where we like the first half of our cycle, we have different hormones surging through us than the middle of our cycle and the end of our cycle. So I call it your hormonal lens. I feel like women need to be taught to pick up their hormonal lens, but then a study would have to go through the eyes of a woman's hormonal lens. And that's very difficult to do
Yeah.
because
How
there's
many
so,
women have the same cycle?
right, exactly. Exactly. Or how many like I get on our social media, I get people who are women in their 20s are like, I don't have a cycle. How do I map things to that? It's this hormonal ebb and flow needs some serious attention from the research world. And I also appreciate what a daunting task that is.
Hmm. So, I mean, and suffice to say, is the research world just kind of written it off as like, hey, this is too complicated, or it's just exponentially more expensive to do so because you have this kind of multifactorial question?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are waking up. I'm having more conversations about this with people that you have to go from being aware that there's a problem to being able to fix the problem. And I
Hmm.
think we're just in that awareness. Like all of a sudden, people are going, wait a second, like autophagy, which is a
Hmm.
cool concept of fasting. Is it the same for men and women?
Mm.
Do women need to fast the same? Like when we see these studies like Walter Longo's study, he did a 3-day water fast study on the immune system. Okay, well, did we ask? Were there women? Were there men? What was the breakup of that study? One of once you see that, like you look through the eyes of how were women treated or how were women identified in the study, you start to look at studies totally different. For example, here in Silicon Valley, we had a guy out of Stanford who was a intermittent fasting specialist, and he was a researcher, and he wanted to understand if you could lose weight with intermittent fasting alone. And he took a group of like 300 to 400 people, and he studied them for quite a bit of time, and it was appeared to be an impressive study. He came out of the study and said, "It looks like intermittent fasting is of no good to people for weight loss." So, and then the headlines grabbed that. And all of a sudden, all we saw across all the major news feeds was intermittent fasting is not a tool for losing weight. So
Hmm.
I dove into the study. In these 300 to 400 people, he had everything from 19-year-old men up to 60-year-old women.
Hmm.
And I was like, wait a second.
Well, this is
These
like reference ranges and lab tests. They just drive me nuts, right?
Yeah. Like you should never compare a 19-year-old man to
No.
even a 40-year-old woman. Like
Hmm.
it's so I think it's a difficult process, but I would like researchers to first identify that they need to have a more of a control over, is it a man study, is it a woman study, and not mix everybody together. And
Hmm.
then we can't get, as consumers of that information, we can't get caught into the idea that just because a headline throws it out there, that now I'm going to shut down my intermittent fasting routine based off of a 19-year-old man. So I think it's really awesome we're having this conversation
Hmm.
because the public needs to be aware of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could tell you've done this before because you immediately were just sort of like gravitated to some of the points that I want to get into today, whether it be fasting and just sort of how long you could potentially fast as a woman, but also looking at potential nutritional solutions for women and how they should be applied. So, I guess, Dr. Mindy, if it's okay, we can play like if you've ever read those mystery novels like Goosebumps, we can do like the choose your destiny kind of thing. Fasting or ketosis, which one would you like to go down first?
Ooh. Well, I'm thinking of logical. I think ketosis is first because
Hmm.
then fasting sort of fits into it.
Hmm. So, I guess looking at the ketogenic diet, and I've spoken to the likes of Dom D'Agostino and a whole bunch of others, but never through the lens of women, the ketogenic diet for women in general. What is the best way for us to look at that? I'm even hesitating to, or just sort of struggling to ask the right question here because it's, from a woman's point of view, is the ketogenic diet right for everyone or whom is it right for?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I'll simplify it for you. If you're under 40 and you still have a cycle, then you're going to want to map your ketogenic diet to your cycle. And let me give you sort of a general idea. It looks like from the day your cycle starts until, let's just go all the way until the week before your period, you will do really well with a ketogenic diet. The estrogen is very insulin sensitive. If you
Mhm,
get estrogen out of balance, insulin will go out of balance. If you get insulin out of balance, then estrogen will go out of balance. So when we look at a woman's cycle from day one all the way till about after you ovulate, so even like day 16 of her cycle, you need to be insulin sensitive. And I do not know anything better that makes you insulin sensitive than the ketogenic diet.
mhm,
So, and you match that with fasting, and now you are really able to use the estrogen you're making. Here's the
mhm,
challenge. As we get closer to day 20, you make a hormone called progesterone. And progesterone doesn't really care about insulin so much. And progesterone is very susceptible to hormetic stressors. And hormetic stressors are anything that just any stressor that puts a little bit of a spike in cortisol, you're going to have a decline in your progesterone. So women before their cycle, usually around a week before their cycle, need to actually carb load. This is
mhm,
very difficult for women that follow a ketogenic diet. They do not want to carb load. So I really go one layer deeper and say, you want to lean into the foods that will build you progesterone. These are
mhm,
beans, potatoes, squashes, even some rice, although I don't always recommend rice, some fruits, berries, citrus fruits, tropical fruits.
mm,
So, and then if you do that the week before your cycle, and then once your cycle starts, the day you start bleeding, go back to a ketogenic diet, you will find you're going to get a better result with your ketogenic diet because that's how you want to hormonally, your hormones need that ebb and flow of your diet to be able to make those key hormones.
mm.
So go ahead, and then I'll do women over 40, but that's such an important point for women under 40 to know.
Okay, so in the women under 40 category, when you're talking about a ketogenic diet here, are you referring just sort of to ketogenic macros, like 65% fat and above, lower carb, etc., or are there specific macros and I guess is dirty keto okay, or are
Yeah,
we looking
no, not.
something else? I
so
think I knew the answer to that before I asked,
yeah,
but I had to.
okay, so and I'm glad you bring up dirty keto because
Mhm,
fats really matter and chemicals really matter, especially
mhm,
when you're trying to become insulin sensitive.
mhm,
So, to me, the ketogenic diet, there's two ways you can get into ketosis. You can manipulate your macros, or you can fast, or you can do both. So, since we're staying in the food lane, when we get over to fasting, we can chat a little more about that. But I would say my macros for women is not an extremely low keto. I struggle with for short bursts, the staying under 20 grams can work for a woman. Long term, not good for women.
Hmm.
So I have a term I use called ketobiotic, which is 50 grams of net carbs,
Hmm.
50 grams of protein, and over 60% of your food coming from good fat, not bad fat. And then really making sure that your carbs, why I put the biotic part in there, is make sure your carbs are coming from plant sources,
Yeah.
not from breads and pastas. Because women also have a microbial system in her gut called the estrobolome that will break estrogen down. So
Mm-hmm.
a woman going completely plant free can be very difficult for that system.
Hmm.
So
And the
those are the
20
macros.
grams and going below 20 grams, what's sort of the long-term effects of that?
You will, if you do it at the wrong time of your cycle, like, so
Hmm.
if you did it the week before, it would tank progesterone too
Oy.
much. It's way too low. But if you did it like day 10 of your cycle when you're trying to make estrogen, it would be okay over there.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, but what we see on our platforms is a lot of women who gets incredible results with ketosis, and they do it by going under 20 grams, and they stay under 20 grams forever and ever and ever and ever. And all of a sudden their hair falls out, they lose their period, maybe they're trying to get pregnant, they don't even realize that they're making themselves infertile, so thyroid gets thrown off.
Hmm.
This isn't what we're looking for.
No, it doesn't sound like health optimization in that state.
No,
No.
no. Just because
Uh,
the scale says the number you want
mhm.
doesn't mean you're living in the body you want.
Exactly, exactly. That's really, really good to hear. Dr. Mindy, I interrupted you earlier on over 40. So
Yes.
over
So
40, what does this look like?
so then over 40, here's what's crazy about over 40 is that our hormones dramatically shift, and it
Hmm.
takes about 10 to 15 years where the ovaries start to like kick out. They're like, I'm done, I've been making you sex hormones forever, now I'm going to stop making them, and I'm going to hand the job of making sex hormones over to your adrenal glands.
Hmm.
So if a woman is highly stressed as she goes into her 40s, her adrenals now have to make all those stress hormones, plus it has to start to make those sex hormones. So women in their 40s start to become very estrogen resistant.
Hmm.
And the estrogen levels will decline, and as estrogen levels decline, she becomes more insulin resistant.
Mm.
So a woman has got to be more, she has to have more flexibility and variation. If
Hmm.
she doesn't have a cycle, then actually she can do really well with like 6 days a week of ketogenic fasting. If there's no cycle to track, then she can really do more like a man and she's going to want to lean into ketosis, fasting, and bring that body more, or those cells more insulin sensitive.
Hmm.
And then one day a week, do a hormone building day, like I mentioned, where the cycling woman has to do a week. The woman without a cycle who's post menopause or moving through menopause can get away with one day
Hmm.
a week. So the ratios change, the protocol changes because the hormones are changing.
And so that one day a week is not necessarily like, let's go nuts on pizza and every sort of
No,
donut out there. It's just, as
no,
you said earlier, it's going back to really some of those, I mean, just healthier carbohydrates, if we will,
right.
right?
Yeah. And then you have exactly I always say it's not eating a tub of ice cream and a box of pizza.
The cheat
That's not,
day. People are
yeah,
going to get upset right now.
I know. We call it a feast day, but it's
Yeah.
feasting on foods that nature provided for you
Hmm.
to be able to build hormones.
Hmm.
So if you are through in menopause or through it and you are struggling to lose weight, the ketogenic diet will be amazing for you. Fasting will be amazing for you. And just be mindful that one day a week you need to really mind your progesterone and step out of that and make sure that you are building using these hormone building foods.
Hmm. While we're on the topic of sort of general nutrition, before we get into fasting, because there's certainly a lot of stuff that I have questions on there. When
Okay.
it comes to meal timing, And maybe this is actually the transition into fasting too. Meal timing. How would sort of, I don't want to say the average woman, but how should a woman look at sort of pre 40, post 40 meal timing? Let's say if they weren't fasting in this case.
Oh, so meal timing if they're not fasting. Well, the first thing, regardless of age, that comes to my mind is, and we could actually put this in context with women going through menopause, is what's really interesting that I don't think is talked enough about is that we really should not be having our heaviest meal at dinner
Yeah,
and then going to bed.
The American dinner and then throwing yourself in front of the computer, or not computer, but like couch and watching Netflix and then going
Yep.
right to bed.
Yep.
No, that's not very healthy. Why is that?
Yeah. So what's happening is your body is going into a state where it's digesting food and it takes energy to be able to do that. And then if you go to bed, you shut down that process and that's stressful to the body. And so A, you're whacking your sympathetic nervous system out. B, I mean, you take a woman over 40, most women or many women over 40 struggle to sleep well. So you're now going to have a difficult time sleeping and you have this food that doesn't get properly digested. So it sits in there. And if we really want to get gross with this, it sits in your gut and ferments.
Hmm.
And as it ferments, it starts to build yeast and fungi like candida, increases your sugar cravings. So you're whacking your nervous system out. You're making yourself more prone to sympathetic dominance.
Hmm.
You're creating an environment where bad fungi can live and you're really not getting the max out of your food, and so you're not pulling the right amount of nutrients because you didn't give your body enough time to be able to actually digest all that food.
Hmm. And so if we're looking at that gap between dinner and bedtime, obviously, if we could all move to Spain and have like the Spanish lunch style and have a smaller dinner,
Yeah.
albeit they eat pretty late there. But if we were to have just sort of the ideal gap between dinner and bedtime, what do you think that is, or
Yeah, I,
what's your
I think it's
experience?
2 hours.
Okay.
It's 2 hours. And you know what's been really fun we've been doing in my community a lot is, in fact, I just charged mine, is doing the wearables. So I've been
Hmm.
wearing the Whoop or the Aura Ring is another great one.
Yep.
And you can find, I'm a big believer in N of one. Figure out what's right for you.
Oh, that
And
tickles my fancy, by the way. Thank you.
it's like hormetic stress. It's
Hmm.
such a good concept that we need to talk more about.
Hmm.
But get yourself a wearable, get an Aura ring, get a Whoop band, and then you decide what's right for you. I can
Hmm.
tell you because it monitors my sleep. I can tell you that when I eat like at 6 o'clock and go to bed at 9, my heart rate variability will go up dramatically.
Hmm.
When I'm on a 2 and 3 day water fast where I'm not, eating at all, my heart rate variability is through the roof
Hmm.
because when I sleep, I'm actually doing what sleep is meant to do.
Hmm.
I am repairing, I'm detoxing my brain, you're stimulating autophagy. You are tapping into these healing mechanisms at sleep that are supposed to happen. But when and you can see it on the wearable. So the next morning you can get up and you can be like, "Oh, okay, that worked for me." So
Hmm.
that's how you can decide what your window should be.
Very, very cool. Uh, At this point, I want to talk about fasting because this is just a fascinating subject and one of the reasons why I wanted to have a conversation with you. First, before we go into just sort of different strategies for fasting and uh, perhaps the cons, let's talk about the pros of fasting. Like, why should somebody listening to this care a lot about fasting?
Because it's how you're designed to be. It's in your
That whole thing called
innate
evolution, right?
yes, it's in your innate cells, and here's the best way I can explain it. If you go back to the cave person days, so
Mhm.
this is something that's just I've been geeking out on a lot lately. We live in this crazy modern world where we have access to food all the time. I mean, I can sit on my couch, pick up my phone, and have somebody deliver my favorite meal to me at my front door. And we are operating out of integrity with how our human body was designed to be, because we are living in a very modern world.
Hmm.
But we literally have the same human body that the cave people did, with a few little modifications to it. So what did the cave people do? They woke up, they looked when the sun came up, they looked out, they came out the cave. They didn't have refrigeration, they didn't have a pantry. They looked around and they were like, okay, we got to go find some food. So they spent the whole day hunting for food, gathering food. Now let's stop and think about this for a moment. We would not have we would not be existing today if they were meant to crash when they didn't eat.
Hmm.
That was not the case. What happened is they tapped into another fuel source, and we call that the ketogenic energy source. Some people call it a fat burning mode. And so it's almost like if you've ever been in a hybrid car and you like start off with the EV and then it kicks into the gas and you get another version of fuel. That's what happens to our body, because that's what needed to happen back in the cave person day. We needed to click into another fuel source. And this other fuel source, this ketogenic energy system, gives us ketones. And ketones go up into the brain. They make us mentally clear. They make us focused. Ketones will get gobbled up by the mitochondria in our muscles, and they'll make it so we can run faster. So you get like this limitless energy, like boost. So you could go find food and you can bring it back to the cave and then you could feast. Well,
Hmm.
that system didn't leave you today. It's still there. You just haven't realized it, because we've been taught breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We've been taught that 6 meals a day speeds up your metabolism. All of that is total bullshit. I can't find any research on that. So we bought into a way of eating that is out of integrity with how our design is meant to be. And if you don't come over to fasting, you're missing out on this whole other fuel source
Hmm.
that is like ready to serve you in the biggest way possible.
Mm.
So to me, that's the best reason to fast.
Amazing. That and you did it. That was amazing, because you even touched on the whole 6 meals a day thing, which I religiously followed when I was in my teens, and it worked well for me because I was keeping my portion sizes small. But when, of course, you get
Yep.
older, people start to do 6 large meals a day, and then they become large, and uh, they're wondering why. And this helps kind of clarify that. So let's get into fasting specifically for women, because it's a topic I haven't covered on the podcast before. And it's something that I sort of feel like I'm walking around, sort of a field of landmines, if you will, and
Yeah.
trying to navigate appropriately, because we have this cycle that we have to deal with. First, should all women consider fasting, or are there specific types that should avoid it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, here's what I would say: if you want to keep your weight in a good place, if you want energy that doesn't, you don't crash, if you want to have memory, brain power, and focus like you've never seen before, then you should fast.
Hmm.
If you don't want those things, then don't fast. So
Hmm.
that would be like the first thing I would say. The people that I have some caveats for on fasting, for starters, pregnant women never fast. In fact, one of my staff is pregnant right now, and we spend so much time together that we used to always every day check in and be like, "How long are you fasting today?" And now I come in the morning and she's got mounds of food around her, and I'm like, "Perfect. That's what pregnant women should do. They should feast. They shouldn't be fasting." Nursing women need to really make sure they don't fast over 17 hours. They don't want to stimulate autophagy, and we can talk about that. Women with eating disorders, I think, should have involve whoever their health coach is in that process. And then the other one is adrenal fatigue. You just have to slowly work yourself into fasting. So those are the
Hmm.
people that need to think about this a little differently in the caveat of women.
Hmm.
Outside of that, women just need to time their fast to their hormonal needs.
Hmm. Before we go on that last point, just because I know the people listening to this show, uh, the adrenal issue is a very common one, right? If you're driven, executive, and you're really burning the candle at both ends, that can get to you sometimes. Uh, What is likely to happen to somebody who fasts while having sort of adrenal insufficiency, if you will?
Yeah. So there's something to remember about stress. We have good stress and we have bad stress. So, and stress looks like a lot of different things. So, stress when you go to work out, you're raising your cortisol. In fact, fasting will raise your cortisol. Having a tough day where you're just go go go, that'll raise your cortisol. So, the trick for people with adrenal fatigue is they want to have little bouts of stress. We call it a hormetic stress, and you can actually start to heal the adrenal glands. You can start to repair the whole HPA axis, which is hypothalamus pituitary. So little bursts of stress can actually be healing to somebody with adrenals.
Hmm.
But if you are completely like you're day in, day out, stressed over and over again, you're struggling with energy, you have to really lean into some shorter fasts and do not go more than intermittent fasting. And because now you've taken a hormetic stress and you put it to a stressful life and you're creating this chronic stress. So you're
Hmm.
really just too much cortisol and the body can't adapt. Short amounts of cortisol actually heals.
Hmm.
So that would be the first thing to say. What I say, just the more applicable answer is if you have adrenal fatigue, start by just pushing your breakfast back an hour and
Yeah.
just get used to that. Maybe 15 hours seems completely undoable. That's fine. You wake up, 8 hours you've been fasting while you sleep, or 7 hours. Okay, could you just push breakfast back an hour and then kind of let your body get used to that? And then
Mhm.
maybe push it back another hour a few weeks later, and then another hour. Could you stabilize your blood sugar by pulling the refined carbohydrates out and like adding in good fats and more protein? Like you almost have to be very gentle with the process
Mhm.
so that you don't tip the stress into this chronic damaging stress spot.
Beautiful. Extremely well said. As a person who started fasting at the absolute wrong time when I was beyond burned out, I know some of the side effects from this. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that. Let's talk about how would somebody get started fasting? So let's say women under 40. How do
Right.
you look at just sort of different fasting protocols for these types of people?
Yeah. So the first thing to know is that the longer you fast, the more healing mechanisms get turned on.
Hmm.
So I call them switches. So, and we can chat about that in a moment. So you're wanting to train your body to be able to fast. And so I do want to look at this like a training experience. If you were training for a marathon, you wouldn't just go out and run 12 miles and see how far you could go. You would be injured. So I want people to approach fasting in the very similar manner.
Hmm.
So you start actually with your food, and it's very much like what I mentioned for the adrenal people. Start by taking out anything that is putting you on the blood sugar roller coaster. So the cookies, the cakes, the crackers, the breads, the pastas, the quick fuel foods that are high on the glycemic index. We want to bring those down and lean into more of nature's foods. I'm not saying don't get carbs, but get your carbs maybe from fruits that have a little more fiber in them,
Hmm.
potatoes, yams, squashes, like things that are more carb rich, but they have fiber, so they stabilize your blood sugar.
Hmm.
And then look at your oils. So make sure you're not doing the bad oils. The bad oils actually make you more on that roller coaster than anything else. So the canola, the cottonseed, the corn, partially hydrogenated, pull those out. Okay,
Hmm.
so you do that for a couple of days. You got getting your, and you might have to do it for a week if you're like a total junk food junkie. So then okay, now you're ready to fast because you've stabilized your blood sugar. So now let's do like what we taught the adrenal fatigue people. Push your breakfast back or push your dinner up an hour and try that for a few days. Now, the adrenal fatigued person may have to try it for a few weeks. The normal healthy person, couple days. Now, here's what's crazy is when you go to compress your eating window and elongate your fasting window, we actually want there to be a little discomfort because in that discomfort, we grow stronger.
Hmm.
So if we push you for a couple of days and you're like, I'm hungry, she said to go an hour, like, I'm really hungry, awesome.
Hmm.
Like, I want you to sit there as long as you can. If you can go 2 hours, amazing. But you just are pushing your body to start to wake up to this ketogenic energy system.
Hmm.
So I usually say do it for a couple of days, push it back an hour, couple days later, push it back another hour within a week's time, couple weeks time, you should be the first ledge to get on is 13 to 15 hours. And
Okay.
if you when you can do that regularly, now you're in the fasting game.
Hmm. And with so 13 to 15 hours first step in terms of fasting, it when we look at some of the you mentioned Walter Longo earlier and some of his sort of 3 and 5 day fasts and these sort of fast mimicking diets, are there any of the sort of longer ones that you would say, not for women, or uh, is everything pretty much fair game?
Everything's fair game at the right time.
Of course. Yeah.
So a man could listen to this podcast and be like, this is really interesting. I think I'm just going to start fasting.
Hmm.
And let's say, I mean, it might be tough, but a man could go in tomorrow into a 3 day water fast. And there would not, I mean, it might be hard, but there wouldn't be a hormonal consequence.
Hmm.
A woman at the wrong time of her cycle or a menopausal woman, if she rushes too quickly into those longer fasts, that's going to be, you're going to tank your hormones. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Mm. Okay. You mentioned earlier switches, and I'd love to hear just sort of when some of those switches occur during fasting. Is it at that 15-hour mark, or when do we actually hit that beautiful word autophagy? Which,
Yeah.
if you can explain that for people, would be helpful as well.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so the first switch is what we call intermittent fasting, and it's 13 to 15 hours. Just to stop and acknowledge the research on some of this stuff is really profound.
Hmm.
So there's two things I like to point out on intermittent fasting. One, I'm sure you're familiar with the New England Journal of Medicine, our
Heard of it once or
meta-analysis.
twice.
It's like the guru of publications
Mhm.
for doctors. Well, in December 2019, they came out with a meta analysis and they had looked over 1,500 peer reviewed journals and they decided that intermittent fasting, 13 to 15 hours, they had a few other versions of intermittent, but for the sake of this conversation, should be, they say this in the article, and I can't, this is why I have to repeat it so people understand how profound this was, that it should be the first line of treatment for obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, asthma, pre and post surgery, and a few autoimmune conditions like MS.
Mhm.
That should be your first line of treatment. Now, let's just stop there for a moment. How many of your doctors, if you have those conditions, are telling you that that should be your first line of treatment? It's not being said.
Yeah,
So,
unless you're working directly with a functional medicine person, which is
excellent.
very, very rare. Um,
Right,
there's very few people that are saying that. That's for sure.
right. So why was it profound for this? Is that it starts to bring insulin or inflammation down. It starts to increase growth hormone, which is growth hormone for like women is really important because that will is stimulate and men actually. Growth hormone is a precursor to testosterone. So we want more growth hormone. It slows the aging process down. It helps you burn fat. So for the obese person, we start to get this new hormone that's helping us burn fat. It's bringing insulin down. And at that mark, you are moving from this sugar burner energy system over to the ketogenic energy system, the fat burning energy system. So you are making your first step in to being in this other energy system that will start to heal you and it will make ketones is a measurement that you're over there.
Hmm.
Um, the other interesting study I just want to point out on intermittent fasting was done on women It was done on women going through breast cancer. And they found that after a woman had done the traditional treatment for breast cancer, whatever version, chemo, radiation, mastectomy, whatever version that was for her, that afterwards, if she just did anywhere from 13 to 15 hours of fasting on a fairly regular, they didn't say how regular, but fairly regular basis, that there was a 70% less reoccurrence of that cancer.
Wow. Wow.
70%. Like,
And we're only talking about like stopping eating at 7 p.m. and eating again at 8 a.m. the next day. That's incredible. 70%. Wow.
70%. So, as a woman, where my brain goes to that is, well, okay, if it worked for women post breast cancer treatment, what if I don't want to get breast cancer?
Hmm.
Maybe I should just do intermittent fasting again, mapping it to my cycle, a little more regular to make sure I prevent breast cancer.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the first step in.
Hmm.
Now, the second step is one that got a lot of attention because of a man named Dr. Osumi. He is a Japanese scientist, and he won the Nobel Prize in 2016 in medicine and physiology. Again, this is in their journals and their world, and he won it for autophagy. And so
Hmm.
autophagy is where, in the absence of food, meaning the blood sugar is starting to go down, it creates a signal that turns on an intelligence inside the cells.
Hmm.
And this intelligence is called autophagy. And the intelligence of the cell looks around the cell and says, hey, no food's coming. I better make this cell more efficient. I better clean this cell up. So any bad bacteria, any viruses, fungi that are in the cell, it will kill it and push it out.
Hmm.
Any mitochondria is what's making us ATP for our energy that needs to repair, it will start to repair it. Endoplasmic reticulum that gives us protein and gives us amino acids and helps to give us even some more antioxidants, it'll repair that. It makes that cell more efficient, and it even will often decide if a cell needs to die.
Hmm.
And if the cell needs to die, it will be like, this cell's not functioning right. It's about to go rogue like a cancer cell, and it will kill it. That's called apoptosis.
Hmm.
All of that happens at 17 hours.
Wow.
So if you want the best detox on the planet, then you want to start stepping into autophagy. And I even want to put one more huge point out there, because this has been my cry for 2020. We have research showing that when a viruses cannot live on their own energy system. They will live off of your energy system.
Hmm.
So if you're a sugar burner and a virus comes into your cells, it will actually take that fuel that is being created from being a sugar burner, and it will gain energy and can replicate at a higher degree.
Hmm.
If your cells are in a state of autophagy and a virus comes in, it will kill the virus and the virus will not replicate. This
Hmm.
was a study done on COVID-19. So, why aren't we all stimulating autophagy? It happens at 17 hours. Why,
You can't tell
why
people
aren't
to
we
not have
working on
their orange mocha frappuccino, right?
it?
It's just,
Right. So this is why, like, when I get an opportunity to like
Mhm.
educate people, like, you're so powerful.
Yeah.
Fasting will teach you how to tap into that power. And the thing with autophagy that I like to just point out for those people who are like fasting experts is, it's like a dial switch. So growth hormone's more like a switch on. This is more like a dimmer switch, where at 17 hours it turns on, and it can continue. It peaks at 72 hours of fasting.
Hmm.
So between 17 and 72 hours of fasting, you are maximizing your autophagy.
So let's talk about that 72-hour range, and then I have a couple of questions around autoimmune conditions. But um, that 72-hour range. So based on the peak of autophagy being at 72 hours, what's sort of the benefit for anybody that wants to go beyond that, or should
Ah,
women in particular, uh, avoid going beyond that?
that's a great question. So stem cells, we
Hmm.
get at 24 hours, we get intestinal stem cells that reboot.
Hmm.
At 72 hours, we get a whole immune system that gets a surge of stem cells, and the immune system will reboot. we're also finding things like musculoskeletal injuries can be healed with a burst of stem cells.
Hmm.
So, if you're not familiar with stem cells, those are cells that can go anywhere in the body and start to heal injured body parts and injured cells.
Hmm.
So, why would you want to go beyond 72 is because at 72 now you've got stem cells. So, the longer you stay fasted, the more stem cells you get.
Hmm.
And the story I always tell is I had an Achilles tendon injury that I just couldn't make go away. I tried everything. So I threw a 5-day water fast at it. And on the fifth day, the pain went away. And that was 3 years ago, never came back.
Hmm.
So I spent 2 days with stem cells, and the body's intelligence is so brilliant that it knew where to send those stem cells. And one of the major places that I know I can educate, my educated brain can feel I got it, was in this Achilles tendon.
Mm.
So the longer you go, the more stem cells you have. Um, Now, having said that, I'm going to say this for both sexes, but I really want to point out to women that I see a lot of women, a lot of people that want to go, well, if 5 days is good, let me go 14, let me go 21.
Let me go 30.
Let me go longer. If a little
Yeah.
bit is good, let me go
Yeah.
longer. And that I want to warn you against without supervision. You
Hmm.
really need, because you lose perspective of what's right for you. And you need a coach, not a friend. You need somebody who knows fasting to be able to coach you through that moment.
Hmm. Yeah. And I know there's clinics in various places that do this, even California, even,
Yeah.
and then Siberia, and then I think there's one notorious one in Costa Rica that may have gotten it wrong a couple of times. But yeah, I completely agree. If you're going to go down that path, like having somebody by your side is very, very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And they, at those clinics, they're checking your blood work very
Hmm.
frequently. Like, they're making sure you're staying safe. It's possible. I mean, there's incredible stories of healing that can happen in those longer fasts, but you really are putting yourself in danger if you are starting to go even 3 days and beyond. Just encourage people to be mindful, check your blood sugar, look at your ketones, and have an authority overlooking you.
Dr. Mindy, I didn't expect this to come of this episode, but you give me an idea on how to heal my VMO. So
Mm,
maybe I'll be water fasting here in the near future. But
yep.
let's talk about fasting in autoimmune conditions. You already mentioned MS and it has a potential benefit there. Is there any danger for something more thyroid related, like? Well, I guess all of these in some ways have a connection to the thyroid, but let's say Hashis or Graves. Any danger in fasting for people with those types of autoimmune conditions?
I wouldn't say there's a danger, but there's some nuances that you're going to
Mm,
want to be aware of.
mm,
So let's go back to what an autoimmune condition is. So to me, there's two things we've got going on. We've got a toxic load issue, and we have an immune system that's hyperactive. So I call it a mixed up immune system. So when we look at this mixed up immune system, so much of our immune system lives in our gut. So I actually, with my patients, love using 24-hour fast to really start to bring back the health of the microbiome and the inner lining of the gut. A 24-hour fast once a week is an incredible tool for an autoimmune condition. So that
mhm.
that would be the first thing. This part about the environmental toxins, and this is maybe going too deep, but pull me back if
No,
we
no,
do.
go for
Okay.
it.
Um, when you stimulate autophagy, you also stimulate apoptosis, and apoptosis is cell death. What happens is that in cell death, any kind of man made synthetic chemical will get redistributed into your body.
Hmm.
So if you're doing a lot of these fasts and you know you have an autoimmune condition, you're going to want to use things like binders, like activated charcoal,
Hmm.
where you can bind, or a zeolite, so you can bind to the toxins that might be getting released. So that
Hmm.
that would be the first thing.
Hmm.
And then you're going to want to heal the gut, and you can use the 24-hour fast to do that. So just be mindful that the longer fast, the more toxins are being spun off, the more binders you're going to need to use to make sure those toxins don't go to the organ that's already been damaged. Now, with thyroid specifically, I would say that you want to be mindful. There's some incredible research showing that in a fasted state, you will absorb your medication more. And there's some research showing that you will absorb your thyroid. It was specifically done on thyroid. You will be more sensitive to your thyroid medication. Well, what does this look like for you? And it's not all necessarily autoimmune conditions, but or a Hashimoto's. It looks like a thyroid storm. Like it's like almost like a hyperactivity where your heart is fluttering, you feel a little dizzy or a little woozy. That can be an indication that you're absorbing your medication really at a higher level than you've been before.
Hmm.
So this is where I just love to involve doctors in the conversation,
Yeah.
because we see over and over and over again people who are able to get off their thyroid medication by using the tools of fasting and healthy eating. But it has to be a slow, methodical process, and you really have to have a doctor that's willing to test you frequently, work with you, and make sure that the medications are being adjusted in a slow manner.
Just on the testing point, how frequently are we talking about here? If you're working with somebody who has, let's say, Hashi's, how often are you testing hormones? Is it every 3 months? Is it every 6 months more?
Yeah, I wouldn't let 6 months go by. So
Okay.
anywhere from once a quarter to once every 6 months.
Very, very helpful.
Yeah.
One last question on the fasting before we go into menopause. Um,
Mhm.
breastfeeding and fasting. You mentioned earlier something about, I think it was 18 hours was the max window, or is it slightly shorter? I would just love to hear from you sort of the implications of going longer if
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and the nuance is important. So remember at 17 hours autophagy hits.
Hmm.
And remember when autophagy hits, so does
Oh,
apoptosis. So we don't breastfeeding, we don't want you stimulating autophagy. So I would go right up, at least in extreme autophagy. I always say don't go more than 17 hours if you're
hmm.
breastfeeding. Because where's all those toxins when toxins get released, they're going into your breast milk, and now they're going into your child.
Yeah, that would be the unfortunate outcome there.
Yeah.
Uh, menopause. All right. This is a decoding superhuman first here. I've never even tried to
Oh,
tackle this. So
I love it.
I want to set the stage for menopause first. So if you don't mind going through some basics with us,
Yeah.
menopause, if you can just give us an overview of when it occurs, what are some of the kind of onset symptoms, roughly for, I know everybody's different, but what are sort of
Yeah.
the generalized symptoms for people?
Yeah. Great question. And, like you and I spoke before, I just really want to rebrand this idea of menopause. In
Hmm.
fact, I'm 51 years old, and I always, here I have this book on menopause, and I still feel like in my mind, menopause is something my mother went through. It's
Hmm.
like, am I old enough to go through this? This is really funny. So here's what happens at 40, around 40, your ovaries will make this slow decline. And it doesn't happen overnight, but the ovaries have been responsible for estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So, as the ovaries make the slow decline, you are going to feel some symptoms that you've never felt before. And my big plea to women is your lifestyle has to change after 40. What you were able to get away with at 30, you will not get away with at 45, because you literally have a set of organs that are on their way out. They're
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I've been giving you eggs every month. Like, I don't have a lot of eggs left. I'm going to slowly check out here. Your adrenals are going to take over. Some peripheral tissues are going to take over." So the lifestyle has to shift. And what if it doesn't? If you don't shift your lifestyle, and we can talk about what those 5 things are that I really recommend women do, then you're going to start getting hot flashes. You're going to not be able to sleep. You're going to gain weight for no reason. You're going to find that you might have some skin issues. You might notice the mucosal membranes start to dry out. Your moods, you're going to be more irritable. I keep thinking about how many divorces probably happen at this time because they didn't make like the proper lifestyle shift. You ask any menopausal woman or perimenopausal woman, it's an extreme sport. if you do not make a shift in your lifestyle. And
Hmm.
what happens is these symptoms appear, and then what do? We either medicate them with like HRT or even bioidenticals, like we just, okay, let's throw some pills at it.
Hmm.
Or we tell a woman, take an antidepressant, which is the
Yeah.
thing that drives me crazy. Or worse yet, this is what happened to me, was when I was trying to figure out my menopause journey, all everybody was just sort of put their arm around me and kind of went, okay, buck up, little camper. This is going to be a hell of a ride. Get ready for it. And I just refused to do that. So that's how I came up with these 5 lifestyle changes that need to
Mm.
happen.
I want to go into those 5 lifestyle changes, but before I do that, you mentioned HRT and HRT peptides. All of these things are very, very trendy right now. Um, do you think there's any possibility in that we can delay or even eliminate menopause using some of these modalities that are available now?
Um, You can minimize the symptoms, but let me put a big warning sign out.
Hmm.
If you look at all the hormonal cancers that take a woman's life, the heart attacks that happen, I think we give a lot of press to the ones that happen at 40, but most of those are happening after menopause.
Hmm.
So the diseases that are coming in 50, 60, the dementia, the Alzheimer's, the heart attacks, the cancers, if you don't make this lifestyle shift, you are setting yourself up for those diseases.
Hmm.
When you come in with HRT, for example, even, I mean, bioidenticals or the natural stuff, I'm a little more open to because they're just sort of a softer way of moving you through.
Hmm.
But if you come in and manipulate too much of estrogen and progesterone and you don't change your lifestyle, I strongly believe you are setting yourself up for that disease later
Hmm.
on in life. So now I understand menopause is tough. Like I'm not saying that I don't want people losing their relationships or walking around irritable all the time. So some of those can be nice crutches, and I'm saying do lean on those crutches and change your lifestyle at the same time. And now you're getting the best of both worlds.
Beautiful. Let's go through those 5 steps that can help people transition, if you will.
Yep.
Actually, insert the best word for me here. Have a better experience
Yeah.
through
It
menopause.
is a transition. It is a
Hmm.
transition. So the first one is what we've been talking about, which is fasting. So, and I mapped all these out in the menopause reset. So I'll kind of go over them high level.
Hmm.
And then what I did in that book is I gave steps on each one of these 5 so women could just easily move into it. So we want to go from eating all day to really compressing our eating window and elongating our fasting window. You don't have to go on a 3-day water fast. You could try intermittent fasting, that could be just fine. But you're going to want to stop eating all day. So you want to have some kind of fasting routine. The second one is we really need to vary our diet. So this has been baffling to me in the world of nutrition. We become zealots for one way to eat. We're like,
Hmm.
I'm a vegan,
Oh,
I'm a
you touch a soft
carnivore.
spot with me. This is like the zealots are crazy. Uh,
It's crazy.
mhm.
You Boomer, you should see on my resetter group, we have a closed Facebook group where we fast together and 40,000 people. And we have arguments probably every other day with the vegans and the carnivores yelling at each other.
Of course, of course. And then toss in a couple of people, and then it's sort of keto, paleo, take your pick, right?
Right.
It's just crazy.
Exactly. Yeah. So stop being a zealot for one style of eating and
Mhm.
understand how to vary your food. So
Mhm.
we've talked a lot about that here. I think every woman over 40 needs to understand keto. I think she should definitely also understand feasting on these hormone building foods, and knowing how to do that and when to do it is a whole other conversation. But I call it keto variations, and it's really learning how to use food to heal you.
Mhm.
So, and then the third one is another one that we don't talk about enough, which is your microbiome.
Mhm.
So we have this incredible set of bacteria that break down estrogen. You're not getting a lot of estrogen after 40. You're going to have to fight for every little bit of estrogen you get. And if your microbiome is destroyed from antibiotic use, from eating meats packed with antibiotics, from lathering yourself with anti septic soaps and toxins that are killing bacteria everywhere, then you don't have the right bacteria to break estrogen down. And estrogen's of no use to you. So I really want people to lean into the polyphenol, the probiotic, the prebiotic rich foods. You can Google those. You can look in the book. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
sure you probably talk a lot about those types of foods.
Mhm.
But plant-based foods like vegetables matter a lot more over 40. You may have gotten away with not eating salads at 30, but at 40, you're going to need to lean into more of the leafy greens and feed those good bacteria.
Mm.
And the fourth one is detox. So a lot of toxins, especially heavy metals, live in our tissues. As lead, for example, lives in our bones. And in our 40s, we're getting this estrogen that's doing this. It's just
Mm.
going up and down. That wild ride of estrogen and hormones, where it just one day you have too much of it, the next day you don't have enough, that will trigger the release of toxins coming out of your stored tissues. And those toxins now will go up into the brain and start to affect the parts of the brain that don't have a blood brain barrier, the parts that control sleep and appetite and your hormones. So you're going to need to have some kind of detox behaviors. And I put a bunch of them in the book. And then the last one, which is actually probably my favorite, is what I call rushing. Well, I have to give credit to Dr. Libby Weaver, who I
Mhm.
actually now have on my schedule to interview on my podcast. I'm
Awesome.
super excited. And it's called the rushing woman syndrome, which is we are overscheduled, we are overdoing, we are not getting enough downtime. And that was fine at 30, that might have worked at 20, but at 45 and 50, your menopausal journey will be horrendous if you don't put in some mindfulness techniques, if you don't stop saying no to every social engage or stop saying yes to every social engagement. We've got to slow the rushing down, especially after 40.
Do you notice that the rushing woman syndrome, I believe is what you called it, is occurring earlier and earlier
Oh yeah.
in women? Because or just in general, right? Because I don't think it's a women only thing, certainly, but uh, it's just fascinating to me that it's almost a habit that you can try and ingrain in your 20s and it would serve you if you were to almost be essentialist about it. But
Yep.
obviously, a lot of us are career driven and we make it to our 30s, 40s, and then all of a sudden, so the transition point is around that menopause time, if you will. It
Yeah.
should be, if not before.
It should be at least, and it doesn't mean that you have to like not perform at
Hmm.
work. It means you need some buffers. And I'll tell you how I use it. So, like Friday afternoon, nothing gets put on my schedule Friday afternoon after about 1.
Damn, I
That
can't get a hold of you then.
can't get a hold of me. I like withdraw. And I know what's really cool is here we're having this interview on a Tuesday. I've got a really busy day and week. But in my mind, I know by Friday at 1, I'm out. I'm done. I can rest.
Mhm.
So I protect Fridays and I protect Sundays. Those I if you invited me over for dinner on a Friday, I say no. If on Sundays, it has to be a pretty spectacular event or thing to go to in order for me to pull me out of my house on a Sunday.
Pool
So
party on a Sunday.
yeah,
I'm gonna persuade you.
yep. No, or like seminars, you won't find me. I mean, unless I have to be there on a Sunday, I'm usually the one that checks out or, and
Mhm.
makes sure that I'm not there. So I have, and that's just my schedule, but you got to have times you can go, 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 but then where are your buffers? Where are your moments of downtime? And I
Mhm.
think that is what women aren't being taught. And to answer your question about younger and younger, I just feel like our society gives people in general so much positive reinforcement for overdoing.
Yeah.
You get the rage, you get the title, you get the followers on social media. You can post all the pictures of yourself doing all these really cool things. And we forget that we weren't biologically, as women, meant to be doing all of that. There needs to be a chill out time for ourselves.
This is beautiful. Dr. Mindy, before I transition into sort of what I call the final four questions, because I need a more original name than that, but
Sure.
what would you say is your sort of top three ways of winding down on the weekend? Top three activities that you.
Ooh. Okay, so you want to know my new way that
Oh,
the
yeah.
pan
Give
yeah,
us the inside information, please.
and yeah, and it's based off neuroscience,
Mm,
and it the pandemic gave it to me. And that is movement. But I'm
mm,
not saying go for a run. So, when our brains are in a state of anxiety, which the rushing woman is often in that state where she's locked, that when we move forward, we go on a walk, especially out in nature. You can get on your bike. Those are really the only two ways. Getting in your car doesn't necessarily do it, but movement forward calms the brain.
mhm.
So I've started coming home at the end of a day and walking the dogs. And I do it at sunset because when the sun is coming down, it signals your eyes register the red light and it signals to your body to make more melatonin so that you could start to prepare for sleep that's going to happen later on.
Mhm.
So get out and walk at sunset is an incredible way to wind down. My second favorite way is pet your dog or your animal. That actually petting or snuggling with an animal. I mean, it happens with a person too.
Yeah.
Releases oxytocin,
Oh,
and
yeah.
oxytocin will calm cortisol down.
Mhm.
Cortisol calm makes you more insulin sensitive. If you're more insulin sensitive, you can balance all of your sex hormones. So go get yourself some oxytocin. If you don't have an animal, if you don't live with somebody, find something that brings you joy or laughter, and make sure that you're conscious about it. I mean, I'll come home if I'm having trouble winding down, I have two dogs. I'll sit and pet them, and that petting really is an oxytocin boost.
Yeah.
And then my third one, I'm not so good at it, but I'll tell you what I'm working on, which is no electronics after like 6 o'clock. Just these things will wind you up and get you stuck in your amygdala brain like nobody's business.
Yeah, it's one thing that I'm working on too.
Yeah.
And we're actually considering getting a dog, so it's funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Probably mainly from my perspective, the additional oxytocin is very, very helpful. So,
I've even at night, if the dog's in bed with you and I can't sleep, I'll just put my hand on the dog and
mhm,
just sort of, and if I need to pet the dog, but that can relax me too enough to go back to sleep.
absolutely. Dr. Mindy, this has been absolutely fantastic, and we're going to get to the book here in a second and where people can find that. But uh, just going over now into the final four questions. What excites you most about the health world right now?
Oh, you have good questions, Boomer. I love this. Okay, here's something that is deep in my heart that I want everybody to realize. 2020 provided us an amazing opportunity to take our health seriously. And we are at a crossroads in for the human species. And if we don't look at the fact that health matters above all else, we will die as a species. I have spoken with many experts who believe in this. Just like we need to take care of our climate, just like we need to take care of our health, we are at a crossroads that needs people to wake up. So if we can wake up and say, whoa, I had no idea that a new virus could shut the world down this much. If we wake up and say, I refuse to put my health last, I refuse to be a consumer that only cares about my own well being and doesn't care about the well being of others, doesn't care about the well being of the planet. You have to understand your grandchildren and your great grandchildren may not have a world to live in.
Mhm.
So what excites me the most is the opportunity that is sitting in front of us right now to care about our health, care about our planet, and care about others. If we step into that, this will be a world beyond anything we've ever seen, that we've ever dreamed of. This could be the greatest planet. We could be the greatest species. We could have so many gifts emerge from this moment if we make the choice to do those three things. That
Wow.
excites me the most.
I got goosebumps as you're saying it. And that whole shift in worldview, if people are looking for sort of a third party source that echoes that and kind of walks people on how to do it. Nassim Haramind has something that's pretty interesting on his website that's free. Second question, and you may be biased here, so I'm kind of curious how you answer this, but your top trick for enhancing your focus.
Oh, I am totally biased. Yeah, get yourself some ketones.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, then
You want
okay, then
to
part B of this question then. What is your
Okay.
feeling on exogenous ketones?
Ah, yes, I have a strong opinion on this.
Hmm.
If you supplement from the outside in too often, then the inner mechanisms that make ketones won't know how to do it. So if you need an exogenous ketone to like have a better performance at for a talk or for a workout every once in a while, I'm okay. I'm there with you. But if you are using exogenous ketones to get into ketosis, you're not allowing your body to figure out how to get into it on its own. And then the last piece of that is we have no research showing what happens when ketones are high and blood sugar is high.
Yeah, that's
So
what I was gonna say. That's
if you
what
right,
some of those
if you're
shakes out there that kind of drive me nuts.
yeah, we're meant to have ketones when blood sugar's low.
Hmm.
So what happens if I eat a lunch and then I'm falling asleep and I go and have some exogenous ketones? I don't know. We don't know what that's going to do long term.
Of course, of course. Very well said. Okay, so ketones for enhancing focus. What is the number one book that has impacted your life and why?
Mm. Okay, so this is a really strange little book that totally changed my life. There's actually two of them. I'll give two of them. The first, it was called Living in the Light by Shakti Gawan,
Hmm.
and it was all about visualization. And at a time when I was in my 20s and I had chronic fatigue syndrome, that book jumped out at me at a bookstore. And I learned in that book that I could use my mind to create any reality that I wanted. And she's no longer alive, otherwise, I bring her on my podcast. But it was a profound book about visualizing. The
Hmm.
second book that I love that has changed my life is The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Did you read that book?
I'm familiar with it, but please.
Okay, so Robin Sharma,
Hmm.
and I read that book when I was first in practice and felt like my vision for my life was to achieve. And then I read that book and realized, oh, that's not going to serve me well. And
Hmm.
it's basically a fable about a man who is an attorney and has a heart attack on the courtroom floor, and then he makes a dramatic shift and becomes a monk, and what he learns in that process.
Hmm. Beautiful. Dr. Minnie, where can people find out more about you, the book, and everything that you're up to?
So the best place to get all my information, or kind of the hub, is my website. So you can go there. The book links to the book, or you can just go to the menopauseresetbook.com. That those are have everything for the book. But otherwise, go to my website, Dr. Mindy Pelz, and you can see all the links there. The content that I put out that I put really my heart and soul into more than, I mean, my books, obviously there's a heart and soul piece there,
Hmm.
but are my YouTube videos.
Hmm.
So I spend a lot of time researching, listening to what people need, what information they need, and I put two new videos out a week. So you can always go to YouTube and binge watch the fasting videos if you really want to like understand this at depth. I think I've got like 600 fasting videos there.
Yeah, it's better than Netflix. There's certainly a lot of content there.
Yeah, thank
Dr.
you.
Mindy, this has been an absolute pleasure. And wow, I could talk to you about so many more topics. You even mentioned chronic fatigue syndrome, which is something that I would love to get into
Mm,
sometime. But
yeah,
thank you so much
let's.
for coming on today.
Oh, thank you, Boomer, for having me. really want people to adopt fasting, because there's nobody that can do it other than you. So
Mhm.
you stop giving your power away to external sources, and you start to reconnect yourself with a power you may never even realized you had. So I just appreciate the opportunity to share what I know and to move that empowerment out to as many people as possible. So thank you.
So many good sound bites in this episode. Dr. Mindy, thank you again. And to all the
Thank you.
superhumans listening out there, have an absolutely epic day.